Cellular respiration. We're going to talk about cellular respiration, and that will be our last mini lecture in the cells chapter. Energy for life comes from the sun. Almost all energy used by living things comes from the sun. Even the gasoline that we use to drive our cars contains energy that came from the sun millions of years ago. So sunlight energy falls on the earth, and plants capture that energy using photosynthesis. And they fix that energy into sugar. So the sugar that we have in our coffee in the morning comes either from sugar cane or sugar beets. We have sugar in maple syrup, and in all the foods we eat. Sometimes my students will say, well, I don't eat sugar. Well, if you eat carbohydrates, that's breaking down into sugar in your digestive system. So when we're talking about sugar in this, we mean all energy that is contained in carbohydrates. So that energy is coming from the sun. The plants are, or the producers, we can also call them producers, are using photosynthesis to fix that energy into sugar and carbohydrate molecules. And then we, humans, which are animals, eat those plants or eat other animals that have consumed those plants, and we get our energy from that food. Energy flows through a living system. Other parts of the food we eat, the carbon, the nitrogen, we're reusing those molecules. Right? The decomposers, the fungi, the bacteria, the worms will return our wastes to the environment where we can reuse those minerals. Notice here heat. So when we do cellular respiration, we produce heat, right? So you can imagine if you're running up and down the stairs a few times, doing some extracellular respiration, you get warm, right? That's the heat that's been lost through this process. Metabolism refers to all chemical reactions of a cell or organism. So when we're talking about metabolism, we're often thinking about burning up calories, but we're also talking about other chemical reactions that happen in the cells. A metabolic pathway is a series of biochemical reactions that converts one substrate to a final product. So that could refer to production of an enzyme or production of a protein, lots and lots of things. So metabolic pathways are several steps that get us to our product. So when energy from the sun is captured during photosynthesis, it uses carbon dioxide and water to produce that glucose, right? So we can call photosynthesis a metabolic pathway. The energy stored in that glucose is then released during cellular respiration. And in fact, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are opposite chemical reactions, right? So here we've got an acorn on an oak tree where the photosynthesis has occurred. That oak tree has stored the sugar and proteins in that acorn, and there we got a squirrel eating the acorn. Energy is defined as the ability to do work. It can be kinetic, it can be potential, and we can have other classifications too. It can be electrical, it can be chemical. Often that chemical reaction, that chemical energy we're talking about is potential energy. So the sugar is potential energy and can be released. So here's an example. We've got a dam holding back the water, and if we've got an electrical turbine built into that dam, then as that water flows downhill, that energy can be captured as electrical energy. We talked earlier about diffusion and how molecules will diffuse down their concentration gradient, and we can capture energy that way, right? And that can happen across a membrane. We'll talk just a little bit about that in this chapter. We are not going through a complete chemical and physiological discussion of cellular respiration. You'll get that in physiology. So chemical energy stored in chemical bonds is potential energy, and when it's released, we call that kinetic. So here we have a carbohydrate chain, and as we break that up, it looks like they're breaking it up into disaccharides. We're releasing energy. We mentioned gasoline. The potential energy stored in chemical bonds of gasoline can be transformed into kinetic energy. And so that kinetic energy is movement. Imagine also that this race car driver just turns off the engine, puts the transmission in neutral, and turns off the engine. That car is going to continue to move as long as there's enough kinetic energy, right? So if you're rolling and you just let it loose, if you're on your bicycle and you just stop pedaling, that kinetic energy will keep you moving for a while. All right, first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. That's why we don't say that mitochondria produce energy. They don't. They're converting it from sugar to ATP. They're moving that energy from the glucose molecule to the ATP molecule. In that process, some of the energy is lost in the form of heat. That's why our bodies are warm, and if we exercise or we're running up and down the stairs, we're going to be getting warmer, right? Or if we have a lot of people in a classroom, the classroom gets warmer, right? Right now we're not in a classroom, but if oftentimes I would come into a classroom that was cool, and then 90 students come in, and 20 minutes later it's not so cool anymore. It's warmer. So some of that energy was lost. We're using those ATPs to work our muscles and to work our brains. Our brains are using glucose to fuel our thought. Our nervous system is using about 20% of our energy. All right. Second law of thermodynamics states that transfer of energy is not completely efficient. That's why we're losing some as heat energy. That's the part that's keeping us warm. So if it's a cold day and you decide to run around a little bit to warm up, you're using that energy that's wasted from cellular respiration. So some other examples in a plant is capturing light energy from the sun and putting that into chemical energy. Here we're looking at an ice cream cone that represents chemical energy, and then some kids are eating that and they are going to convert it into kinetic energy. All right. And at each one of those stages we lose some energy. All right. What are we looking at here? We're looking at energy for a reaction. So some reactions in the cell are going to require an energy input to get them up over their threshold and functioning, right? So an endergonic reaction is going to need some energy to get it going, right? So we have our reactants. We're going to need some energy, get it up here, and then we can proceed with the reaction, right? And so the most common way of providing that energy to get those reactions going is by hydrolysis of ATP. So we're going to take that third phosphate off of ATP, and in that we're going to release, and in doing that we'll release some energy. All right. We're looking now at cellular respiration. When we get to respiratory system, we're going to look at some exchange of oxygen at other levels. Right now we're focused on what's happening in the cell, in the mitochondria. So the cells are extracting energy from food to generate ATP. I'll refer to it as cellular respiration. Other books may refer to it as glucose catabolism, right? So catabolism, we're breaking things down. Anabolic reactions, we're building up, we're adding molecules together. All right. So why do we need this ATP? We're going to use that to provide energy for these various reactions. Because it's an exergonic reaction, it's releasing energy, and that energy can help to run these endergonic reactions. Some reactions release energy, some require it. Exergonic reactions are going to release energy, endergonic reactions are going to require it. So when we free that third phosphate, we call that dephosphorylation. That's when our energy comes off. And when we add it back on, we call that phosphorylation, and that's going to require energy. So here we have a complete ATP molecule. 1, 2, 3 phosphates. And that third one can come and go. Takes an energy to put it on, releases an energy when we take it off. So let's see, how do we get that? So how do we get that third phosphate on? How do we get all our ADPs pumped up to ATPs? We're going to do that in the mitochondria. Right? So we talked about this a little bit in the cells, and we're going to use the membranes inside the mitochondria to do this. We're also going to require oxygen. There is a lot more detail here. There's a great deal more detail that we're leaving out in this particular presentation. You'll get much more of it when you're at physiology, when you take physiology. So our goal here is to add this phosphate to the ADP and get our ATP, which we think of as our energy. Let's use green for this. We think of it as our energy currency, right? Because we can spend it on anything. So this is our energy buck. All right, and here we are. This is our reaction. You want to know this. You absolutely want to know this. Let's get our other highlighter here. Okay. There's our sugar. C6H12O6 represents sugar, represents carbohydrates. Oxygen. These are the reactants. This is what we're starting with. So we got these reactants by eating and by breathing, right? We got our oxygen as we breathe. We get our carbohydrates, our sugar from our food. This is happening inside the mitochondria, and we're going to get carbon dioxide, which is going to be released to the atmosphere. We're getting water, and we're getting a whopping 36 ATP molecules, right? So this is nice. There's our payoff right there. The carbon dioxide, we just breathe it out. The plants will use it again later. So you definitely want to know this reaction. If we flip it the other way, we've got photosynthesis. So photosynthesis will start with sunlight energy, water, and carbon dioxide, and will yield oxygen and carbohydrate. So the pathways that are involved with this are glycolysis, oxidation of pyruvate and the citric acid cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. I am not going to go into those in any kind of detail in this class. I want you to know this reaction, and I want you to know that that's cellular respiration. I'd also like you to start to think about the other body systems. As we go through the body systems in the rest of the book, think about how does this body system support cellular respiration, right? Because everything we're doing is to support cellular respiration. Our respiratory system is bringing in the oxygen. Our digestive system is bringing in the food. Cardiovascular system is bringing the oxygen and the carbohydrate to the cells and carrying away the waste products. This is happening in our muscle cells, in our nervous system, in our nerve cells. Our other body systems, so sensory, we're finding the food, right? Particularly if we were living, even if we've got a Save Mart, a Save Mart and a Vons, and Food for Less, we still have to go find the food, right? So our nervous system is helping us helping us to find the food. Muscular and skeletal. Imagine you're going out to pick your apples and harvest your vegetables. You're using your body to go get that food. We are not going to go through glycolysis, but I wanted to show you this because I want you to know what we're skipping, that we are leaving out a lot of detail. This is showing these individual changes. This is the metabolic pathway that's yielding some NADH and ultimately and some ATP, and these are through these small changes. Anytime you see that ASE, there's an enzyme. ASE, there's an enzyme. So these enzymes are making small changes. Here we've got inputs, right? We're adding energy here because we're going from ATP to ADP. So we're burning up a little bit. We're lighting the match, right? We're lighting the match to get the fire going. Don't spend time with this at this point. In physiology, you may need to know that a lot better. ATP yield. So we get about 36 ATPs per molecule of glucose. I think that's pretty good yield. So that can vary a little bit. We're talking mostly about humans now. And NADH is another energy molecule. So cellular respiration in total manages to get about 34% of the energy from the glucose into ATPs. So what happens to the rest of it? Well, it's being released as heat, right? So that's why we stay warm. That's why we're warmer when we're exercising. There's also, and cellular respiration uses oxygen. It's aerobic. Aerobic means with oxygen. And we can have some metabolism without oxygen, and that's called anaerobic. With oxygen is aerobic, without is anaerobic. And we don't get nearly as many ATPs. We only get a few ATPs. The most common types of fermentation are lactic acid fermentation. And so when you are working out rapidly, let's say you're lifting weights, and you get that burn in your muscles, that's lactic acid. You're feeling the burn. That's because the blood can't get the oxygen there quick enough, right? And so you're not going through aerobic, you're going through anaerobic respiration. So several decades ago, they came up with exercise called aerobics. You probably just take that for granted, but in the gyms they added aerobics, and that was meant to be exercise that did not push you into anaerobic. That kept you at a level where you're just using, you're going slowly enough that you're using the oxygen. You're not pushing all the way into anaerobic. Then there's also alcohol fermentation. So these are things that happen when there's not enough oxygen. All right, that is the end of our mini lecture on cellular respiration.